Healthy garden soil makes everything easier as a gardener. The healthier your soil is, the less you need to manipulate it to get your garden to really flourish. So this video is all about 5 tips, do's and don'ts for really healthy, regenerative garden soil. All right, we're here at my son's garden, which is a nice low garden. And as you can see, there are some tomatoes that are probably difficult to reach on the other side. On this side, there's a temptation to step into the garden like this to be able to reach for it. I don't actually want to put my weight on there because in a garden, you really want to walk on the area that the plants are going to grow as little as possible. And the reason for that is because when plants are growing, their roots that are tunneling through the soil need pockets of both water and air. Those pockets get filled with the rainwater, and the air around there as well also is important for the root development. Even when you cut off a stem to make a rooting to propagate it in water, it's relying on the dissolved air in the water. Both air and water are very important. As well, it's hard for roots to tunnel down into really heavy, compacted soil, particularly if you have a clay soil. So the less you can put pressure from above on the soil, the better for your overall garden health. So it won't get compacted, and so those roots can really thrive. So number 1, don't walk on your garden. Rely on pathways and stepping stones so that you know where your weight can go and you can see where it should not go. Number 2, when you're preparing your bed for the season, don't till. Tilling is a practice that has been around for a long time, whereby people will turn up the soil, trying to prevent it from being compacted, trying to remove weed seeds from it. You may see a rototiller. Those are really common tools that people will get out in the spring to prep their beds. But it actually can do a lot more harm than good and can create more work for you, because when you pull up the compacted soil, you also destroy those nice little tunnels that earthworms have made and the pockets that may be there from last year's roots that are now decaying, those air and water pockets that the roots really need to thrive. And what's going to happen is that fluffy soil that you till is going to compact down because you don't have the microorganisms and the organisms in them and the roots to sustain the structure that you create. Nice loose soil, but there's nothing to really keep it there. You've taken all of the life out of the soil. So instead of tilling soil, retain the structure that you got last season and just add whatever you need on top of the soil so that you're creating layers of healthy soil on top of each other without destroying what was already created. So number 2, don't till. Number 3, and now you should be starting to notice a theme here, is to leave medium to small beneficial roots in the soil of your garden bed. And the reason to do that is because as they decompose, they'll release their nutrients, worms will come along and they'll make castings out of the nutrients, and you will overall feed your bed better and reduce compaction because you aren't going to be creating a vacuum that then over time gets pressed down. So when I have this lovely coriander here that has gone to seed, you can see, and I've been purposefully harvesting some of that. Instead of pulling the coriander out, I'm gonna just snip it off down at the roots. Now ideally, I should also be doing this with weeds like this one here, because if I just snip it off like this, or you can use a garden knife if you prefer, sometimes I do prefer that, then you'll stop the weed in its tracks. This one's already gone to seed, so that's kind of my bad, but you won't disrupt the soil. So this is one of the ones where it's a little bit do what I say, not what I do, because while I do clip off plenty of these plants at the soil level and leave the roots behind, there can be little weeds where, you know, it's just satisfying to get the root. It is better for gardening if I clipped this one instead of pulled it, but it's kind of like, you know, popping that pimple or something. It feels good. But the better soil health is to ignore that impulse and leave your small and medium-sized roots where they are, clip them off at the base. What's the line between a medium root and one that you should remove? Well, anytime you have a diseased plant, I do remove those roots. If I have early tomato blight or something like that, I don't want that carrying on, living in the soil for the next season if I can help it. So in addition to crop rotation, I'm going to pull out that root. The other thing is there are some plants where, of course, you're taking the root out. You're growing a carrot. A carrot is a root. So you can't be perfect about this one. But about the largest root that I would leave is almost any root, and then maybe take it out the next season if it hasn't decomposed enough. Broccoli and sunflowers are the ones that really come to mind. They can be large like that, and even those I will, not with my clippers, but I will cut them off at the soil level. Most of the time my broccoli does over the winter start to decompose. I can easily plant around it, and my next generation of plants thank me for it. So it's really as much as your garden can handle is as big of a root that you can leave in the garden. Number 4 is the only do on our list. Do add back to the soil. You do want to give the soil the tools it needs to feed your plants. And usually that's going to be nutrients. So right on top, not digging it in, you might pull back a mulch layer and add a layer of compost. One thing that I really like to do is get some of my naturally derived feeds, like this is blood and bone meal. I'll just take a handful and then I'll knock it off of the leaves. So when it rains, that will help to feed the soil and feed my nice pumpkin that's getting really quite large here for me. When you're adding back, if you add natural substances like hen manure, compost, mushroom compost, blood and bone meal, seaweed fertilizer, those sorts of things, it's not going to burn the roots of your plants because it tends to be a slower release, and it's also going to overall be better for the environment and I think also your garden because the carbon footprint is going to be way lower. Synthetic fertilizers tend to have a very high carbon footprint and also tend to be a little bit more tricky to work with. Nice natural slow release fertilizers at the start of your gardening season as a feed every couple of weeks during. This will give you really healthy soil that will give everything that your plants need to thrive, to their roots and to them. The 5th tip that I have for you today on how to have really healthy garden soil that will reduce your workload and give you a really lovely garden, especially next year, is to always have your soil covered. So you can see this garden, I did have some sunflowers and some other things growing here that some animals came and I didn't have any other plants to succession plant, but it's covered with mulch right now, which protects it. It protects the organisms that live in the soil. It's going to protect the soil from drying out, from baking, and importantly, from oxidizing. So much like metal, if it's exposed to oxygen for too long, will oxidize and will break down or rust. Soil will oxidize as well. And that means that oxygen will get added to the carbon specifically that's in the soil. And remember, carbon is the building block of life. That's one of the first things that they teach people when they take organic chemistry in high school. If you happen to take organic chemistry in high school, you may remember that. But carbon plus oxygen combines to form carbon dioxide, which is also a greenhouse gas. So in that way, not only do you lose that building block of life from your garden, but you also contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and your garden's carbon footprint. So if you keep your garden covered with mulch like I have, or with a cover crop or plants, that helps to keep moisture, to keep life in your soil, and you won't have to do as much to it next year when you want to use the soil to grow your garden again. So those are my 5 tips on how to have a healthy garden soil that will grow your garden, and however your garden grows, keep growing as a gardener.